The advantage to the plug-in hybrid is that you get the best of both worlds. You don't have to build all those charging stations necessarily, just charge it at home. When your charge runs out, you run off the gasoline. But the advantage to it is you're addressing the air pollution problem from combustion while you're driving around town on your battery.
Welcome to the Environmental Transformation Podcast, where we bring you interviews with industry leaders, climate champions, sustainability practitioners, EHS and hazmat professionals making an impact in their businesses today. Each leader solving complex challenges and delivering solutions within their areas of expertise. I'm your host, Sean Grady, and thanks for joining us today. Before we jump in, make sure to follow us on your devices and visit my website at www.seankgrady.com and sign up for our newsletter and email announcements. Now let's get started.
Welcome to the Environmental Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Grady, and today's guest is John Beath. He is a life cycle assessment certified professional and a registered professional engineer in Texas. He also has more than 20 years of experience in the sustainability industry as a consultant. He currently serves as CEO of a sustainability environmental consulting company. He's got a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from Georgia Tech and has authored 3 short books on the various aspects of sustainability. He currently serves as a member of the board of directors of the American Center for Life Cycle Assessment. So, John, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Really excited to be here, and good set of topics that you have picked out for us here, I think.
Yeah, no, we're really happy to have you on. And you know, we connected through, I think one of your marketing teams were looking to maybe get you on the show, and we're always looking for good guests. And so for those listeners out there, if you've got an interesting topic you'd like to bring to the show, always interested to maybe interview those potential candidates and bring them on and educate our listeners. So, John, before we get in, could you give us a little background on how you got started in life cycle assessments or analysis and also the sustainability business that you're running today?
Yeah, sure. It's been quite a journey for me. I tell people that I'm a recovering process engineer. I got tired of designing things that were not destined to be built quickly. And that's what junior engineers in a refinery do, I found out. And they never told me that when I moved into the profession to begin with. So I found a way to escape to the environmental department, and they convinced me that that wasn't where they sent old soldiers to die, that in fact you actually could have a role in the world. And it happened that was back in the 80s, and things were beginning to take shape in the environmental sector in a bold new way. And I was able to do a lot of first of its kind sort of activities. And fast forward, I was the guy who turned out the lights at the refinery and sort of moved on into the consulting world and joined a big box consulting company, was there for quite a while. And while I was there, I had a client one day that called me and asked if we could do a life cycle assessment for them. And like most eager consultants, I accepted the job. And then right after the call, I called my colleagues in the UK and said, what the heck is a life cycle assessment and how do I do one? And that was in like 2006. So,
okay. Right.
That was 20 years ago, and a lot's happened since then. I left that company at some point and founded my own company now just almost exactly 11 years ago. And that company was just me at the time, and now it's a lot more than that. I wanted to focus on sustainability and life cycle assessment and carbon footprints and that sort of thing. And so that's what this company has enabled me to do. So
well, that's great. That's good. I mean, yeah. So the punishment ended up being kind of like your passion.
yeah, absolutely. It's true. And maybe just a few more words on, what happened with that experience, just to sort of round that out. So they told me that they wanted to prove that their solar panels that they were making were green. And I said to myself, well, of course they're green. And they said, no, an investor told them the only way to do that was to do a life cycle assessment. So I rounded up a team. We went to the plant. We cataloged the raw materials, the utilities, the emissions, the waste, the co-products, the yields, all that stuff. And that's the kind of data you need to assess a product across its life cycle, from the removal of raw materials from the earth all the way through transportation, manufacturing, distribution, installation, use, maintenance, all that stuff. And people do carbon footprints as a streamlined version of that for lots of reasons. But what's driving that business now is customer requests, investor demands, and an effort to make claims to try to increase market share. So that's how the game has evolved over time. And that's the kind of exposure we get through our client work.
Well, so let's break down for the novice here, because there's a lot of listeners who follow the podcast and join along who, they may be practitioners in this space, but there's a lot who aren't. They're just kind of casual interested parties. They work in the environmental industry, but they maybe not be involved in sustainability type activities where life cycle analysis is required. So let's break this down. What's the process? How does this concept work? In real practice, and let's break this down so we can get them prepared for the rest of the conversation.
All right. Well, it is a little bit complicated, I'll admit, but at the basis, what you're really trying to do is take a flow rate of material and assign it to an emission factor, and then end up with a result. So I call that A times B equals C. And it's no different than in traditional environmental world, how you would do an emissions inventory. What's different about this, though, is that if you're doing a carbon footprint, at least, what you're chasing really is those instances where whatever you're doing creates a CO2, methane, or N2O emission to the atmosphere. And most often, that's combustion, unless you have a pipeline of methane, and then methane is going to leak out of the pipeline directly. You don't need combustion for that. But for most other things, it's about combustion. And so if you're a manufacturing plant, it's pretty straightforward. You have fired process heaters. You can understand what that is. But when you look across the life cycle now, it's not just what you're doing inside your plant. Instead, I'm including the raw materials that are coming to you and how they were made. And so there's energy. Say you've got a bulldozer and it's going to mine that material out of the ground. Well, there goes some CO2 from that. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grind it up maybe. Okay, there's some electrical energy that goes into that. At the power plant, there's CO2 for that. Now I'm going to put it in a truck and I'm going to haul it. And so guess what? The truck is burning some sort of fuel, or it's electric, one or the other. In either case, it's energy. It ties back probably to combustion at some point. And so again, CO2. So we're doing an inventory that adds up all those steps down the line, even through the end of the manufacturing to distribution. Again, we got some trucks, maybe it goes into the use phase. And if it's something simple like a plastic bottle, you might say, well, this doesn't really have a use phase, does it? Well, in reality, it does, because guess what? A lot of people like their drinking water and they like it cold. So what do? They put it in the refrigerator. Well, now that's part of the life cycle for your product as well.
Yeah, when you think about that, oh my gosh, I mean, all the actual inputs that you need to consider to assess a full, I guess, complete picture of the life cycle analysis, that could be pretty daunting, just trying to understand all the inputs. And then how do you derive, emission factors for all that work?
Well, if you had to go get a CO2 meter and meter every single one of those things I just described, you'd bankrupt yourself. So
Right.
the way it works is that people have already been there, done that. And so they're creating a library of information you can draw from. And so
Okay.
there are environmental databases that store that kind of experience-based data that you can then draw on. Probably the largest one of those is called EcoInvent, and they have thousands of factors in there for things you can't even imagine that you might need a factor for. And that's not by any means the only place where you go, and that's behind a paywall, so not everybody gets to use that. But the idea is you're adding to some experience, and you have what's called primary data, because in some cases, what's the electric bill for your plant to make these plastic bottles? Well, okay, I know what my electric bill is. I know how many of these I made. So now I can give you what's called, a really accurate primary data-based estimate of what my emissions for this was. But if I'm a company and I don't make the polyethylene beads that are used to blow mold the plastic, then I have to trust some secondary data probably for that. And I
Right.
might go to this database, I might go to the company and say, have you got a carbon footprint? And by the way, if you want me to buy your product, I really want you to share that. Otherwise, I'm going to find somebody else who's willing to share that, and I'll buy their product.
Are you when you're doing these assessments for clients, and you're going through this process, are you finding that a lot of these suppliers of these raw materials are providing their carbon emission factors or input that, for the impact of the product they're selling. So that way, every metric ton or whatever gallon, that you can use that as an input.
It's a mixed bag, and
Okay.
I think it depends a lot on what industry sector you're in.
Okay.
In the building product space, you find a lot of people are embodying that into what's called an environmental product declaration, or an EPD. Some of the building trades are more and more are beginning to see a requirement for you to not only share the data, but share it in that form.
Mm-hmm.
But in lots of other sectors, it's a lot more random in terms of, well, if I'm selling a product to another business, they may make it conditional that you have to provide some data to me, or I'm not going to buy your product. As we move into consumer products, it's even more squishy. The reason people will do these kinds of studies is because they maybe have an investor that wants to get data about that, or maybe they want to make a market claim. So if they're going to make a market claim, they're going to try to get as much primary data as they can, but they are going to find those firewalls that you mentioned. Is the supplier willing to share? Well, that's a changing environment, and what you're finding is people that are outside the U.S., where the regulatory environment is pushing faster, you'll find
like
them
Europe.
more likely, like Europe and Asia as well. You'll
Okay.
find them much more likely to share that information because they've been conditioned by companies that are in those locations that's how things are done.
Right. Well, that's awesome. I mean, so when we look at your journey here, the catalyst of you starting this business, you've been in the environmental business over 40 years as an engineer. What was the specific gap or the problem you were trying to solve in the industry that drove you to write these books that you wrote? You wrote 3 books, and why don't you share a little bit about your books and talk about that? And then, what was the lack of understanding of the process or the prohibitive cost of the existing tool that was like you were trying to fix? Like, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I won't try to pretend that I have the universal solution to that problem, but I took some steps down that highway. And so,
Right.
yeah, the thing that was in my mind was that, one, I piled up a lot of experience. My company's piled up a lot of experience. I felt like, I'm moving on in my career. It's time for me to start sharing some of that stuff. So that was definitely a motivator. But more importantly, a lot of the information that's out there is pretty hard to digest. It's written
Yeah.
for R&D engineers and nerdy science types. And if you want to nerd out and go to those detail elements, that's great. But for people who aren't working in that space every day, they need a bit of a translator. And so that's the role that
Dumb
I
it
try to
down just
play.
a little bit so the average guy who knows math can do some stuff.
Exactly. And so there were 3 books that ended up coming, and full disclosure, I did them in part because that's how I continue to remain certified as a certified professional, is you have to publish or perish to a certain extent. And so that was part of my pathway to holding on to my credentials. But I also wanted to do the things that I told you. So it's a balancing act. Anyway, 3 books. One was a specific need for a friend that we had who was an organic farmer. And I felt like all the things that have been written about how to footprint a farm were really hard to get your arms around. And so this written so that a farmer could actually do their own footprint. And
Oh, wow.
you don't need a master's in environmental engineering to be able to walk through that. So it's
Are
very simplistic. It's very, pardon the pun, down to earth.
Yeah.
But that's the sort of thing that I felt like was really needed. So
Do you
that
get
was
any? Let me interject real quick. Do you get any interest from, say, universities, agricultural universities, to come and talk about this in a class or course or anything?
probably because not many of them go browsing around on our website and try to find that. It is something that I'd love to be able to do, but frankly, no, that hasn't been an issue. We're kind of in our little silo. We're the company that nobody knows anything about. And that's one of the reasons we're trying to change that, is to get some of this information out there. So
Sure. Well,
people
we'll
will
help
know,
you do that. Yeah.
people will know who the translators are and who they might be able to rely on. So that leads me to the second effort. And these are numbered, by the way: LCA 101, LCA 102, and LCA 103, kind of tongue in cheek, but
Yeah, that
nonetheless.
sounds like taking my college courses, That's what it's
Yeah,
like.
exactly. And that's the intent, except college, not college in this case.
Right.
So 102 is a little bit more of a heavy duty nature. And this was inspired because of the fact that there are so many people that are coming into the electric vehicle space that have an agenda, and they gather up some data and they try to convince people that they're right and that here's why you should move in a certain direction. And I got really tired of that. And so we got hired by an oil company and by a trade association to really look objectively into that. And we did. And we learned an awful lot about that. And so the book is a methodology. It's how do you analyze a situation in a very objective, scientific, comprehensive way and draw some good conclusions about the trade-offs that happen there. So that's what that book is about.
Okay.
The third one, LCA 103, was a horse of a completely different color. This was, I'm tired of people coming to me and saying, I can't do carbon footprints because I can't afford the price of a big database, but I really want to have something I can roll around in and try some things. So one day the idea popped in my head that there's a database that's free from the government that is environmental emission factors for all of the things that go into a car. And if you think about a car, it's plastic, there's metal, there's wire, there's glass, there's all this cool stuff. And all those factors are in that database. So I said, well, why don't I just extract that information out there, put it in a table, put a nice little front end in it, and create some examples where you actually footprint some comparisons and roll that into a book. And so that's what I did. And so not only is the book out there, but also you have the ability to download the workbook itself and actually play around with it yourself.
Well, so how many companies can, view the LCA as a black box and handle it by, expensive specialists now? I mean, it seems like there's a big business in this space for that. And how does your hands-on approach solve the problem of accessibility for the average engineer or small business owner?
Yeah, that's a subject that's really near and dear to my heart. You really struck a chord when you got that. So the simple solution that I just described to you, LCA 103, the little workbook I have, only focuses on raw materials. It's a piece of that supply chain. But what we find is a lot of products that are made might find 90 or even more % of the overall footprint might be in the raw materials. So if you want to do comparisons, that's a good place to start. It is by no means a tool that's going to replace an LCA database because it's only looking at the front end of your problem, but it allows you to get in, roll around, understand the process. Now, parallel from that, I am extremely concerned about working with black box LCA databases because I've been working with them throughout my career, and I don't like the way you can't really see the work. You can't really understand what it's doing.
Yeah.
And so for the last 10 years, we've been working to develop a parallel solution. Basically, it's an Excel workbook that does everything that the OpenLCA model does with a couple of restrictions, okay? But it does those calculations in the same detailed way, not just for carbon, but for other environmental impacts like acidification, ozone depletion, energy, toxicology, all the things that are part of these environmental impact factor sets. So we did that because we really wanted to be able to answer the question for our clients that say, okay, you got this answer from your database. How do you know it's right? How do you check that? And so we said, okay, well, what do you do normally when someone says to check that? Well, you get a piece of paper and you write down some numbers and you look up the factors and you basically do manually, a set of calculations for, one of the elements, say a raw material, to see if it looks like the box is doing its right way. Well, or you might use Excel to do that. And so that led to the leap of faith that was, okay, well, why don't we just do all those calculations and then we'll know for sure we've checked everything. And then we said, well, if we're going to go to the trouble to do that, maybe there's a reason why our clients may want to do that, because then it becomes a what if tool that's transparent. They can see all the activities, they can QA it, and they're going to get a huge amount of benefit from it by people using it who aren't people that are in the LCA database tool every day, because that's what it takes to be effective with those things. Any kind of complicated software, any kind of modeling software, if you're not working with it regularly, you're going to struggle. But the nice thing about Excel is you can look at it. I don't care what you were working on 30 minutes ago or for the last 2 months, you can look at that Excel and kind of go, yeah, I see what's going on here. Okay, that's great. And by that transparency, it's also a really good QA tool on your data. So as you're looking at it, and we have it tied to some graphs and tables so that when you put in the results, you can see right in front of you what's happening. And if you see things that you aren't expecting, you can drill down into them, and then obviously you can make changes to it and see how the results play out. So we're really excited about it. We're doing our second project now to use that tool, and we have cross-checked it against the Open LCA to see if we could get exactly the same results, and we did. So that's where we are.
Hello, ET Nation. I want to thank you for listening to the podcast. If you're enjoying the interviews we bring you, consider supporting the program by visiting my website at SeanKGrady.com and buy me a cup of coffee. Proceeds will go towards helping me continue producing timely content and offset production costs. I'd also like to take a moment and recognize a few of our sponsors of the show who have been amazing partners and are ET Nation legends. If you're looking for a drilling and environmental contracting firm to help you delineate the extent of contamination at your site, then look no further than Cascade Environmental. Cascade has over 37 offices across the country and offers a huge range of environmental and geotechnical drilling, site characterization, and remediation services. With their huge fleet of equipment, nationwide coverage, Cascade is a great choice to support your environmental and infrastructure needs. To learn more, check out their website at cascade-env.com. That's cascade-env.com. Hey, are you looking for an equipment rental company to help you with your next wastewater remediation or waste management project? E-Tank is the only environmental equipment rental company in the industry that offers 100% guaranteed, certified clean temporary liquid storage tanks at no additional cost. This protocol gives peace of mind for the previous customer by limiting their downstream liability, as well as the future customer by preventing any cross-contamination for all of their rental tanks. E-Tank also runs a one-of-a-kind complete maintenance program for all rental items, including liquid-tight roll-off containers, fluid transfer pumps, and filtration items. The next time you are presented with an environmental challenge, call E-Tank to come up with the solution for your problem. I want to thank one of our sponsors, WasteLink. WasteLink is the all-in-one software platform transforming how environmental professionals manage waste, connecting generators, service providers, and disposal facilities in a way that is simple, connected, and transparent. Their platform helps streamline everything from waste profiling and routing to inventory management and billing, giving you the tools you need to operate more efficiently and reduce cost. Whether you're a generator looking for better options or a service provider seeking greater efficiency, WasteLink has you covered. If you're ready to take control of your waste management processes and optimize your business, visit wasteLink.com to schedule a demo today.
Well, I mean, so why is the transparency of, in formulas and the ability of the user to, basically see the guts of this actual process and all the calculations that you put into the formulas there inside the Excel? Why is that so important and so vital for the credibility of the sustainability claims instead of using a black box?
It is just that. And what's interesting is that when you do a life cycle assessment, if you're going to share the results and make a claim, you're supposed to have it third-party reviewed, which means theoretically someone's looking over your shoulder.
Right.
Well, additionally, what has happened with that in large measure, and I have done third-party review myself, so I speak from a little bit of experience, the centroid of how those reviewers tend to approach things is there's a list of things that ISO says have to be in your life cycle assessment. It has to have goal and scope, has to have system boundary, has to have functional unit, all these things that are supposed to be in your report. And so it becomes a checklist. Got this, got this, got this, got this. Okay, great. Therefore, you have a great LCA report. I'm your reviewer. You met all the requirements in ISO. Have a nice day.
Right.
Well, I got a fundamental problem with that because you didn't say, and by the way, I checked all the numbers to make sure that you really did the calculations in a comprehensive and effective way. And the problem is when you have a model, the only way that you could really have a way to do that would be to literally take every step that the person who set up the model did. Well, who wants to pay for that twice? No one. Right. So that's why having this transparent thing allows the auditor, the reviewer, to actually say, yeah, I actually checked the math. I can see what's going on. I know that it's doing the A times B equals C, and it's got the right A's, it's using the right B's, and yeah, the C answer benchmarks, it looks effective,
Yeah.
it's the right answer, or within some range of accuracy anyway.
Sure. No, that's good. I mean, and I think, like you said, it just elevates the power of the tool and the credibility of the calculations and the outcomes. So that's excellent. If we talk about selecting factors, I think a lot of people are trying to always figure out, where do I get this emission factor for a typical type of product or raw material. But it seems like a major hurdle for beginners in knowing which emission factor to use. So why do you anchor in your books the Argonne National Labs GREET model as kind of like your main source of factors that you have the readers translate to the most complex data sets?
Well, it doesn't hurt that I've been working with the people at Argonne Lab for ever since GREET was first developed, frankly, and
Okay.
we've actually contributed to some of that content. We created some tools that that slave off of the information that's in GREET that they have made part of their package, actually. So we're extremely familiar with that. But that being said, it's run by the government. It's based on a lot of publicly available government data, like from EIA and other government agencies, and it gets updated every year.
Mhm.
And it also gets peer reviewed fairly well. And so I have a lot of confidence in what's in there. Now, the bad news is, if this is not a material that goes in your car, then you're not going to find it in there. So you're going to have to go
That's
somewhere
right.
else to
Mm.
find those factors. And so a lot of what many people do is they just, in today's world of AI, you just go to your computer and you say carbon footprint for shampoo, and you're going to get some studies for that. And trust but verify.
It's amazing now how AI is going to be used for some of the work that we're doing in the environmental space. And yeah, you just prompt it with a question. It's going to give you kind of like, oh, here's all the raw materials that go into, shampoo for carbon, and bam,
Yeah, and you'll get some answers too, but the most important thing is it's going to point you to the sources. And so then what we do as scientists is we're going to open up that source, by the way, if it's actually there. Every
yeah,
now and then you will find that it tells you that a source exists and it doesn't actually. We have had
right.
that experience. But
Yeah.
if you open it up, you're looking for things like, was it peer reviewed? How did they do their calculation? What sort of assumptions did they make? What sort of credentials even do the people have that worked on that? Those are all things that you can do. And then if you're like most people, you want to try to benchmark that as well. So I don't want just one study. I really want two studies that I can compare against each other. Now I'm feeling really good about it.
Yeah.
And the third thing I might do as a practitioner, I have these eco-invent factors. I have access to them all. They're behind a paywall. I can use those to benchmark the study. So that way the client doesn't have to pay for the eco-invent factor, because here it is, it's publicly available in this study, and yeah, quietly, I tell the client, by the way, I checked it against EcoInvent. Now, I probably am not going to be able to say that in the report, but that gives the
Gives you
client a little bit
confidence.
more confidence. Right.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Well, there's been a lot of going on in the environmental world these days. EPA has, interestingly enough, pulled back some new, rules. The endangerment clause of air emission was recently rescinded. So if we look at, let's say, your LCA 102, which is around the electric vehicles, in your book, in the electric vehicles, you challenge one size fits all narrative in electrification. So what are the most critical, often overlooked variables, such as grid intensity, battery weight, and what, can that completely be flipped with the results of, of the EV versus the internal combustion engine comparison now, or, these new rules are going to be affecting?
Well, first of all,
The
the
assessment.
endangerment finding situation really doesn't impact much of anything that's said in the book that we wrote. The fact that some people in the government have decided that greenhouse gases don't threaten, human health, and therefore they're not endangering us, is a completely separate issue. If
Yeah.
you're still interested in making an impact on carbon, then you still want to study the electric vehicle. You still want to figure out, where it makes sense and where it doesn't. And not just with electric vehicles, but anything that is powered by a fuel source that's not fossil fuel. These are the kinds of things that you may want to think about. But for the EV in particular, one of the things that struck me right on the head when I first started looking at it is the temperature impacts. And people have always talked about them, in terms of that being a strong part of the process, and it absolutely is. However, in ways that you might not think about directly. So people think about how the battery performs when it's hot outside. Okay, that's great, but that's not really the big effect. It's that an internal combustion engine is heating up your cab when it's hot out, or when it's cold inside. You want it to be hot inside. So you get that benefit of the internal combustion engine. With an EV, guess what? No combustion. So now becomes a tax on your battery. Part of your power that you're counting on has to go into heating the vehicle. And that is a carbon footprint balancing act issue. But the one that I found even more intriguing than that was how you charge your car. So that battery, in order to protect itself, has temperature monitoring with it that says, hey, you're only allowed to charge me if the temperature is within a certain range. And if it's too cold, I'm going to activate a heating element, and I'm going to heat up the area around the battery so you don't damage your battery. On the other side of the coin, if it's too hot out there in where your battery lives, I'm going to engage a fan, and I'm going to try to cool down that battery, and I'm not going to let you charge it until I've cooled down the cargo space enough to where the battery is the right temperature. Well, you're not going to find those results on your EPA sticker for your EV. They're not part of what happens because they don't happen as you operate the vehicle. They're not part of your efficiency, but actually they are if you take a life cycle approach to this. So those are really important things. Where you charge your vehicle is really important. Say you live in Chicago and your junk's in your garage instead of your car. No one would ever let that happen, right? But if that's your case, then you're going to pay a huge tax for heating out this car outside. Whereas instead, if you charge it in your car or in your garage, got rid of the junk, that would be a great place for you to be. And furthermore, if you really want to up your game even a little bit further, then you might insulate your garage also, so that now you're not having to take that head start either when it's hot or cold. Insulation will help you both ways with respect to that. So, but there are things that matter a lot that were part of the study that we did, and they're part of the book. The key thing, obviously, is the grid and what's going on in the state where you are operating. It's no secret that as you look at say the Eastern Seaboard states, you can see, that West Virginia, Kentucky, they're a coal weighted grid, and so the electric vehicles aren't going to do as well there in terms of carbon reduction, right? And surprisingly, if you look at EV sales, one of the biggest places where EVs are selling right now is in California. And unfortunately, in California, the grid is really pretty good. So the net benefit of putting EVs, if you could pick wherever you want them, you wouldn't put them in California. You would put them, every single vehicle you could replace in West Virginia, you'd try to. The problem is we have customers, and customers have preferences, and they have geographic locations. So are you going to get demand to line up with what is the best for the environment overall? Probably not, but at least you can understand, what those forces mean and how to put them in perspective. And that's what the book tried to do.
Yeah, because when you think about the grid, I mean, not like you just mentioned, not all utilities are the same when it comes to delivering the power and their source of power and the emissions that are involved with generating that power for the utility. And having a grasp of that and where certain factors are going to play into the equation versus, in a location that maybe a hydro-powered company or somewhere like that. That's like, you got to really know your stuff.
And actually, just as a side note, I have to react to your use of hydropower there, because hydropower is uniquely different from wind and solar. They all have a burden that results from, the equipment part of it. And I haven't mentioned capital equipment, but that's also part of the footprint theoretically. It's typically a minor player. But with those people who are using hydroelectric power, one of the things that's been often overlooked is the impacts from the reservoir. So when you create a hydro power plant, typically there's a reservoir that's associated with it. When you bring that reservoir into being, what are you doing? Well, you're flooding land. And as you do, the biological growth that was in that area that you flooded is going to off gas for years and years and years. And they are now starting to measure exactly what that is and therefore define the hydroelectric power plant footprint as not zero. It's certainly not like burning fossil fuels, but it's not zero. And so
Okay.
that's part of how the life cycle assessment science evolves over time, is we learn things and we get a broader perspective, even more than we had before, about what really matters and what doesn't and how much.
Well, okay, so let's take this other kind of interesting question, because I think a lot of people are like, "Hey, it takes as much carbon and impact to build an EV car as it does a gas combustion, internal combustion car, or maybe it takes more. I don't know." But maybe through your experience, could you kind of shed some light on, the pros and cons of this? Just because maybe the listener is just saying, I want to do what's best to buy the right car related to its carbon emission impact, say over its lifespan that I'm going to have the car, versus me buying an internal combustion car and just buying fuel to power it, over time. And then the cost benefit analysis. I mean, what's your take on that? Because I'm sure you're kind of looking at that as well.
Well, it definitely is complicated. First of all, a lot of people will raise their hand and say, "Oh, it's the battery. That's the reason why these EVs, their footprint really isn't that great. And if you assess the battery, you'll figure out that whatever fuel savings there is gets weighed out by how carbon intensive it is to make the battery." Well,
Mhm.
I think that's been gaslit and proven not to be the key aspect. It is an important aspect, but in terms of percentage, the use phase and the use of the power plant or internal combustion is going to far outweigh that element of it. And we studied this in a very detailed way for a bus manufacturer. We built a carbon comparison tool for them,
Yeah.
which basically compares diesel buses to CNG to hybrid to electric buses. And we did this because their customers really want to know, if I'm buying a fleet of buses and I had diesel buses before and now I have CNG or now I have electric, what exact footprint difference am I going to make? Because say I'm a city or a university, they actually have carbon reduction plans and they have to literally factor this kind of information into it. So we worked with the manufacturer over the space of a year to collect a bunch of data and try to come to what's probably not the be all end all, but it's a good estimation tool to be able to say, yeah, pretty clearly this is how it works out. And as you might expect, the electric buses are pretty much always going to win the equation, but it's by how much. And it gets to, again, where's the footprint. But there's another important aspect which I haven't brought in so far, but I will, and that's the role of the plug-in hybrid vehicle, which is where I've been living in my own personal space for the last 10 years. I have personally driven a plug-in hybrid vehicle, and I believe that's the ultimate solution to the problem for the short term, because the challenge electric vehicles have is the ability to have cruise range based on where the chargers are, the cost of what charging is, and the time it takes to charge. All of those things are dramatic issues, and the IRA was going to fix all of that. Well, when that got rescinded, now where's the money going to come from, not only for the charging stations that we might need ultimately, but also for the power plants? We're already competing for power plant bandwidth with the data centers and how AI is driving that to a higher level of power demand. That's the EVs are going to compete for that. The advantage to the plug-in hybrid is that you get the best of both worlds. You don't have to build all those charging stations necessarily. Just charge it at home. When your charge runs out, you run off gasoline. But the advantage to it is you're addressing the air pollution problem from combustion while you're driving around town on your battery. And when you're out on the highway, you run out of battery, and now I'm on fossil fuel. But guess what? You're not exhausting all that information into the breathing zone of people. So it's a really good trade-off. So that's not going to get you to the goal as fast as an EV will, but it's going to put points on the board that much more quickly because we don't have the charging, we don't have the power plants to go all the way to the end of the tunnel. But we could pretty much convert every new vehicle to a plug-in hybrid, and we would get points on the board way faster if we did that.
So when you did you also factor in the cost of the vehicles and stuff?
We did.
Because a lot of the EVs are a lot more expensive in a lot of cases than a normal internal combustion car. And I'm thinking average family guy who just, needs to get a good, $15,000 car to, run for a good, 100,000 miles or whatever, until he's ready, whatever it is. I mean, when I look at those types of decisions versus an EV versus like that, I start to go, it doesn't make as much sense as an EV versus that, because I just feel like it seems like it's a better, more cost effective and less impact, since the car's already been built. Like I'm not buying a new car, I'm buying a used car, right? Type thing.
Well, there's a lot to unpack with that. One of the things about electric vehicles is the more the vehicle weighs, and I'm not talking about the weight of the battery, I'm talking about the vehicle overall. The more it weighs, typically the less well it's going to perform. So the 4-door sedan, really small electric vehicles, which is kind of why Tesla went down that road, the smaller the vehicle, the better it's going to perform in all those categories you just talked about. But if we're talking a Suburban, a Yukon, even a pickup truck, that's a more challenging space. And that's why people have been really slow to conquer that marketplace. There's another really dramatic force here, and I don't know where that's going to happen, but it could be a shockwave for this. And that is the price of vehicles for electric in Asia is shockingly low. You can buy an electric vehicle in China for a small fraction of what things are here in the US. And of course, those Chinese vehicles are enjoined from coming into the US at this point. If that were to change, this whole discussion we had might change dramatically.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just saw that isn't Ford going to start building a smaller unit type electrical car? It's like I don't know, 2-seater truck or something that's like
Ford is really conflicted. They pulled away from the electric F-150.
Yeah.
And I was surprised to see that. But I think they're uncertain, as a lot of people are. And again, I'm the voice for the plug-in hybrid as the hedge solution that you can do while the marketplace sorts itself out.
The hybrid to me is the best choice. I would totally agree with you there, John. I think that, and I was looking to get a hybrid just recently, but ended up going a different direction. But I like the hybrid because of all the reasons you just mentioned. I mean, you get the benefit of battery charging, and then when you run out, you've got you can fuel, but
do what you want. And I mean, just as an example, during COVID, when I had my previous vehicle, I went 3 months without buying gas. And that was really helpful when you're in COVID and you really didn't want to be roaming around, being around other people and so forth. So I literally could just run my errands, do my thing, come back to my house, and I stayed within the battery's limits. Now I upgraded. Now I have a Chrysler Pacifica minivan, and it will do 33 miles instead of the 23 that I had before. So now when I'm in town, I almost never end up having to use fossil fuel. And when I go to Houston to go take a flight, I live in Beaumont, Texas, that's 80 miles to that airport. I'm going to end up using some gas, but I don't do that all that often. So it fits my lifestyle.
Well, I think the big challenge with a lot of the people adopting is the grid, the charging grid that's out there, and I think that's the biggest limitation for growth right now is that there's not enough charging ports. And I mean, just think of all the people that live in like apartments, or rental things like they don't have the infrastructure to put that stuff in their living spaces. So you're just not going to get the big adoption, I don't think, as much as we'd like to see. But
this is a suburban solution. There's no other way to describe it.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Well, let's keep going here. When we talk about, this policy shift that's recently happened, the greenhouse gas engagement finding being repealed, the federal motor vehicle standard for the federal motor vehicle standards, the regulatory landscape is shifting significantly. in your view, does this make data-driven LCA more or less important for automotive manufacturers?
I think the auto manufacturers are going to continue to be pressured by their consumers' focus.
External factors like
Yeah,
Europe and
yeah.
others?
Well, not just that, but their consumers' focus. So just
Okay.
because the government thinks that climate change is not an issue, that doesn't mean the consumers feel that way.
Right.
Um, and so as long as there's that universe of consumers that, are willing to be open to the problem and open to the solution, but want to use that cost lens. And that's a really important part of LCA is it doesn't actually provide that cost lens. There was a phenomenon 15 years ago called life cycle cost, which basically was an LCA with a cost layer on top of it. And that never really caught on. But at some point, maybe it will come back in because just reducing carbon with a passion without contemplating carefully what the cost will be of that, that's not really sustainability. Because sustainability is this something that you can keep doing? Well, if it's something that is hurting your lifestyle because you're spending too much money on it, then you went too far. So the balancing act is to say, I want a carbon benefit, but I want to pay a fair price for it. And so that's what the consumer should be thinking about, whether he's a business consumer, whether he's buying a car or whatever, it's cost and benefit. That's how engineers are trained. That's how we should be thinking.
Well, do you think this policy shift is going to maybe produce more hybrids versus fully electrics?
I think what's going to produce more hybrids is the fact that you really can't make a trip across the country in an EV without it being extremely inconvenient. And I think most people that buy cars have it in their mind they're going to take a vacation. And do they really want to plan their vacation around where the charging stations are? Some people will say, "Yeah, I'm all into carbon. I'm going to do that." But that's really not even my boat. So, I think that's what's going to drive it more than anything else. And of course, the IRA was going to put those charging stations out there at a huge cost.
Mm.
And for whatever reason, we don't have that part of the IRA. So that's not going to happen. So how quickly will we get the kind of charger density we need to make EVs ubiquitous without the government spend into that? I think it's going to be a slow process.
Well, so with EPA stepping back a bit on this with the greenhouse gas standards now, do you believe like independent environmental product declarations will become the primary way the market rather than the government determines which vehicles are truly green now?
That's a good question. Only a few manufacturers have so far gone down the EPD route. In fact, I'm not aware of really many U.S. manufacturers that have done it. There are some foreign manufacturers that have.
Hmm.
So will the EPDs become more prevalent? I think as people get more comfortable with how they're done, and as we start to streamline the process, which there are efforts underway to do that by both consultants and program operators that are the places where these EPDs are stored. That process is evolving pretty rapidly, in part because people are using AI to streamline it to a small extent, although trust but verify, that's my watchword whenever you bring that up. Um, but it is a changing landscape. I think people are still going to be involved with carbon for quite some time to come, and it's always been, a roller coaster of up and down based on different events, kind of like the stock market.
Hmm.
And I think that's going to continue. I don't think the endangerment finding is changing anybody's pulse, but maybe it just does underscore that market forces come and go all the time.
Right.
And there's an action reaction sort of thing that happens with consumers. The auto manufacturers definitely are paying huge attention to their customers, and they're paying attention to their bankers and the private equities that control their supply chain. And so it's a complicated landscape, but no one is completely closing their eyes to the carbon world because it impacts us, even if the government doesn't have rules, for lots of reasons.
Yeah, no, I agree. So where do you think we go next with this whole, carbon, footprint, life cycle assessment process, especially given the nature of your books being around, car emission factors and others? What do you think we're going to be, moving forward?
I think this.
Because it seems like the market is really kind of like, oh, they're pivoting right now.
I think the science is going to get better. I think the accuracy and defensibility and reliability of this work is going to get better because it is evolving science still.
Yeah.
So that is going to change. The role of EPDs and how important that's going to be is yet to be defined. And one of the things about EPDs that people don't really get is that that's only part of the process. So you quantify what your emissions are, and you basically are checking a box saying, yep, here's my emissions. I have an EPD. That is not a reduction plan. That is not a guarantee as to what your performance is going to be all the time. It is a lot of different things. But where that's going to go exactly is kind of hard to say.
Do you feel like, down the road here, we'll see like cars, like we see in our cars now, you're driving and you get like, metrics like average miles per gallon. You know where, what you're getting for your trips and things like that. Do you think eventually we're going to start seeing CO2 emission factors pop up on your screen on your car and then showing you like on a weekly, daily, monthly, whatever, yearly assessment of your impact on emission by driving your car?
I don't see any reason why that couldn't happen because, in electric vehicles in particular and in plug-in hybrids, all that data is there. It's just a matter of actually, coding the screens to actually display that. It's customer demand driven. Are the customers going to want to see that? Are they interested in carbon footprints for their meal when they go to a restaurant or, supplies they buy in the hardware store? That's not going to happen tomorrow or the next day. You're seeing it in Europe in increasing levels and to a certain extent in Asia as well. So
kind of like the calories on the back of your packaging. It tells you exactly.
Exactly. And there was a move afoot in the UK to extend that packaging to include carbon footprint. And they got about a third of the way down that highway and they basically ran out of money and they stopped.
Gotcha.
So it is very costly to do that thing for some products, for sure. But for EVs and even conventional gas combustion engines that have digital displays, pretty easy to make that sort of information available. So yeah, I think it's coming and I think it has a good place.
Well,
if you have an EV, it coaches you on what's equivalent to miles per gallon. You get kilowatt hours per mile. You get that readout. I get that readout all the time as I'm driving. So it's not couched in carbon, but in my brain, I know it, if my efficiency is poor, then my carbon is higher. It's a pretty direct relationship there.
Well, and then when I look at it or I think of it, there's a lot of companies that are putting their sustainability reports together and they track, what's my carbon impact from my, vehicle fleet that we have in the company. Mm-hmm. Well, how cool would it be if they could just like run the metrics right off the darn vehicles because it's already there. They don't have to go figure it out. They actually get the actual number because they know how much fuel was burned and they can pull that telemetry right out of there.
There are some truck firms that are working with software that do that sort of thing. Yeah. I believe Walmart has a pilot program in place where they're trying to do that with their company-owned trucks at least. Yeah. So yeah, that's definitely coming.
Yeah, no, that's good. Well, John, how can listeners get copies of your books and learn more about your services?
Well, there's several ways. The easiest is you can look for LCA 101, 102, 103 in Amazon. They're self-published there for a ridiculously low price. But if you want to get them even cheaper, like for free, you can also go to our website. If you can navigate through and find where the forms you fill out are, our website is beath.us, and you'll find a place where you can see downloads there. The third book is in a different place, which I'm trying to get moved. That's if you look under the LCA section and go all the way down to the bottom of the page, you'll see the links for that. And if you follow that link, the advantage to that is you get a zip file download of not just the book in PDF form, but also
the Excel.
The Excel is there as well.
Okay, great. That's awesome. That's really good. Well, John, thanks for coming on the show today. We really appreciate you coming and talking to us about the life cycle analysis and what the great work you've been doing around developing this Excel calculation spreadsheet that can be used to help people understand what their carbon impact is. And really appreciate that.
Thanks for listening and watching the show. If you enjoyed the show, then please share it with your friends and coworkers on social media and tell somebody in person. Thanks for being with us, ET Nation.